Thanks to everybody for joining, especially those online and those of you here in person. We got quite a bit to cover here, but and sorry for getting started a little bit late. Let's go around the room. Just say your name and who you represent or who you work for, just so those online can also hear. Jeff DenBleyker with Jacobs.
Andrew Ruppke, UGS.
Tom Tripp, US Magnesium in Tooele County.
Som Dutta, Utah State University.
Christine Rumsey, USGS.
Ryan Rowland, USGS. Kyle Stone, Division of Wildlife.
John Left, Wildlife Resources.
Joe Havasey, Compass Minerals in North Arm.
Ben Steyerman, FFSL.
Laura Vernon, Forestry Farm State Lands.
All right, and then online I see Phil Brown and David O'Leary. And Jennifer, Jamie Butler, Krishna Khatri, and then we have Jennifer Biggs.
That's me.
Yeah.
And Elliot too.
Oh, and Elliot. Yep. Carly Beadle. Vital. And Carly are who are
Westminster.
Westminster. That's right.
Oh, that's the
Great Salt Lake Institute.
Yeah, great.
Hi, can you hear me? This is Carly.
Yeah, glad you could make it.
Hi, yeah, I got very lost. I have no idea where this meeting is, so I am joining online.
All right.
Happy to be here.
Well, good. Good. Yeah, we're kind of in a building in the back of the whole DNR complex. But glad you could join us. Are you driving around looking for us, or are you somewhere?
Yeah, I got out and was walking around, but you know what? I'm just gonna be online now. It's but yeah.
Okay, well, hopefully you can find us. We're kind of at north of the main DNR building.
Just about to Redwood Road.
Yeah, right next to Redwood Road.
That's what you get for listening to Jamie Butler's directions.
All right, well, so in terms of our agenda today, there's a lot that we want to cover here. Obviously, we've had a hot summer. Lake levels are really low. Wanted to ask Ryan and Christine if they could give us an update on salinity conditions in the lake. I wanted to spend a few minutes just getting input from all of you, especially those who are out and about on the lake and the shoreline, getting your input. What are you observing with these new low lake levels? Asked Laura if she could give us an update on the berm construction. And then wanted to focus on some of the research that the Hot Topics grants have been funding. And so we've got some new grants that have been awarded to USGS and to Utah State University. And then Christine is going to give us a summary of their previous grant, the preliminary results from their study. So, and then from there, talk about some action items and schedule our next meeting. One thing before we get into it all, I guess more kind of a housekeeping thing. Our meetings are being now advertised as public meetings. They've never been closed, but we're making sure that they're getting posted to the state website for that. And
As per the charter.
for the charter, correct. And so we've been recording them, and I've been summarizing things all along, but now we're going to be making sure that that's all available online. So just make sure everybody's aware of that. So I guess with that, Ryan, do you want to? No.
slide 1.
All right. Sorry.
That's okay.
There we go.
Okay, well, it's our pleasure to be here. Christine and I are going to tag team our update to the group. And we're going to talk about lake elevations a little bit. We talk about that just about every time we get together. And then we're going to talk about discharge and velocity data collected at the new breach. And then Christine will give an update on salinity out on the lake. Next slide. Okay, well, everybody is in this room is up to date, I'm sure, on lake levels. The average daily value on August 2nd was 4189.7. We're in new record territory. We broke the October 2021 record on July 3rd when we hit an average daily elevation of 4190.1. So we've dropped about 0.4-ish feet since July 3rd. And
89.6 now as of yesterday.
as of yesterday, I did not update. So it's 89.6. So we've dropped 0.5 feet. And we have a lot of time left this summer and fall for the lake to continue to drop. Last year it leveled out at mid-October, so we'll see if that happens again this year. It could drop about another foot is my guess. That's not an official forecast. Next slide. Let's talk a little bit about major surface water inflows before we get into new breach stuff. So here's a cumulative flow plot for the Bear River near Corinne. You know, this represents the major surface water inflow to the lake. So we have cumulative stream flow in millions of acre feet. The bold black line is the data for this water year. The x-axis is a water year. And then the blue line is the max cumulative flow ever measured. And the yellow line is the min. And then the green zone is the 25th to 75th percentile range, or the normal range. And you can see this year, we're well below the 25th percentile, the bottom boundary of the normal range. And as of August 3rd, 420,000 acre feet had passed that gauge. Relative to the same day last year, we're up 15,000 acre feet, slight improvement at this site, but not a fantastic improvement. People, I think, were expecting a little more water. The snowpack was a little better, but it did not necessarily translate downstream all the way to Great Salt Lake. Next slide. And there's our cumulative flow plot for water year 2021 for the Bear River at Corinne. And now a little bit on the Weber River near Plain City. Same type of cumulative flow plot. The dark black line is trending just above the record low cumulative flow at this site for water year 2022. Hit the next button.
What was the minimum year, do you recall?
The minimum years was at this site 1988. Yep. So, which is kind of, early days were like massively wet, right?
The lake was as high, 86 and 87.
Yeah.
So then we got a dry year right after that.
Yeah. So as of August 3rd, 2022, 46,100 acre feet had passed the Weber at Plain City gauge. The previous year, by the same date, 53,700 acre feet. So less water has passed that gauge relative to last water year.
We're plus 15 and now we're minus another 7, so we're net 8.
Just for those two gauges, I don't have plots for the Goggin or Farmington Bay outflow, but the point is, a lot of this, we've had better stream flows in the upper part of these basins, but they're not translating down to the lake necessarily.
You think reservoir capture is?
That's very logical. Yeah. The reservoirs have done better this year overall in terms of storage. Even though, well, it's a complicated story, but the average reservoir capacity right now is almost the same as it was this time last year. But we started at a lower baseline this year. So anyway, everybody gets the point. The stream, the amount of water coming in this water year is not much better than last year. Next. Okay, so as you all know, we measure discharge at the new breach on a monthly basis, where we actually go out with our acoustic instrument, make a manual discharge measurement. On this plot, the blue circles are south to north discharge. Red circles are north to south. And then on this plot, we also have the elevation difference between the south and the north arms based on the saline gauge and the Saltaire gauge. That's the gray line. And, you know, we've all seen this plot a million times. When the breach was first opened up, we had massive south to north flows. And over time, as the head difference, or the elevation difference, I should say, between the north and the south has gone down, the flows going both directions have decreased a bit. Let's just focus in on the most recent data, which is on the next slide. Okay, so same plot, only we're showing data just from October 2021 out to the current measurements that have been made out at the site. And let's just focus in on these measurements, July 14th, July 22nd, and August 2nd. So on July 14th, we had relatively high flows going both flow directions in the 400 CFS range, slightly more water going south to north. July 22nd, the south to north values much higher than the north to south values. You know, could be a response to these really low lake levels and just the dynamics at the new breach. But on July 22nd, we had flows over 600 CFS going from south to north, and then the flows in the north to south direction were it was about 111 CFS. August 2nd, after the berm was done, we measured going north to south south to north about 500 CFS. 519 CFS to be exact if you look at the text below the plot. The north to south discharge data are very noisy. The velocities are extremely low. And so we're not confident we can calculate a value just yet for the north to south, but it's very low. When we do find it's going to be 10 CFS or less. And we're not sure if 10 CFS means 0 to 10 CFS at this point. We're just kind of working through the data. The velocities are very, very low in that north to south flow direction. So what happened there? Well, the berm was raised on July 28th. They completed the 4-foot raise in the berm, and we know to a high degree of certainty that the discharge going north to south has dropped off. And I'll prove it to you. Next slide. So we have an uplooker velocity meter in the throat of the new breach. It's just on the north side of the bridge. And so it's looking up, measuring water velocities at 10 locations in the water column. And they represent both historically north to south flow and south to north flow. So on this plot, we have velocity in feet per second. Positive velocity values represent south to north. Negative velocity values represent north to south. Here, the 0 line you can see on the plot, you know, roughly in the center of the plot. Leading up to when the berm was raised, we had very strong negative velocities at depth. That's the north to south flow. And we had strong velocities going south to north. When the berm was completed on July 28th, you see the north to south velocities basically trend to 0. Roughly, they're bouncing close to 0, you know, 0.5 feet per second or less. They're all trending around 0. And even the south to north velocities look like they've dropped as well. So this uplooker acoustic data, invaluable, right? We got to see in real time basically the impact of that berm being raised. But it looks like the north to south velocities at depth are just very close to 0 now, where they weren't previously. Any questions on that before I move on?
So is your interpretation, by putting that berm in, we close the window for north to south, from south to north? So you got a smaller cross section to put the flow through? Is that how you're interpreting that?
Yeah, for sure. Yep. But the velocities could be speeding up, you know, in response.
The head hasn't gone up, so we don't expect that much, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's where the modelers, you know, can help us, and more acoustic data like the next slide. Okay, so this is data from the acoustic Doppler current profiler discharge measurement made on October 2nd. The discharge measurement was made about 20 to 30 feet north of the bridge. And we have depth on the y-axis, and we have the cross section, or excuse me, the distance across the channel on the x-axis. the colors represent the velocities. Cooler colors, blues and pinks, are negative velocities representing north to south flow. The greens and into the warmer colors, those are positive velocities representing south to north flow. We have some blues, some cooler colors in this measurement on August 2nd, which are north to south velocities. They're very low velocities, 0.3 of a foot and less feet per second. But we think that we have eddies happening on the edges in the channel. So these are the things we have to work through in order to come up with that north to south discharge number for the August 2nd measurement. So we've got to inspect this data more closely, but we have a lot of greens and reds in the middle of the channel. So we're confident that we've got south to north flow for sure. And it, 519, I think, CFS was the number that we put on that, 500 CFS-ish. So we've got a really rich data set to help us understand the flow dynamics at the breach. And we were in a meeting with SOM earlier today, so we coordinate all this data information with the modelers. Next slide. In addition to using our acoustic Doppler profile instrument to get that beautiful velocity field that we just looked at, we sent down a price AA velocity meter, which is just spinning cups. Literally, there's a weight, and there's spinning cups above the weight, and we lowered that down. That's kind of the old school way of measuring velocities in water channels. It's like a wind vane, wind speed sensor. And so what we have is depth below water surface going from near surface down to 15 feet. Oops, can't see.
Jen.
Something happened
Oh,
there.
so no, someone said they weren't getting sound, so I was just making sure we were still connected.
All right, so we have depth on the y-axis going down to about 15 feet, and then we have velocity on the x-axis going from 0 out to 0.8 feet per second. And so shallower water, you can see strong velocities, 0.7 feet per second-ish. As we go down through the water column, you see the velocities, according to the spinning cups, drop off to near 0. And there's a lot of error associated with these velocity measurements. You can imagine these spinning cups, if there's any turbulence, how they can move one way, move the other. But it looks like the velocities are very, very low in the deeper part of the channel. Next slide. Okay, so what we're doing at the new breach right now is we're increasing the frequency of our site visits. In response to the berm modification. There's a nice picture of the new berm taken on July 29, 2022. And I'm not sure who took that picture. Was that us? It was Christine took that picture. So we visited within 1 and 5 days of the berm being raised, and then we're gonna go 12, and then we're gonna go every 2 weeks. So this is an increased amount of monitoring to make sure that our electronic instruments, our sensors are providing us representative data, and there's no substitute for having eyes out looking at that breach and new berm and how it's impacting flows.
We changed the display where the slide is bigger.
That's right.
I'm not sure what I did.
Bonnie's.
Just a pin on Bonnie's thing.
Unpin Bonnie.
And when we're out there, we're measuring discharge using the ADCP, the instrument, the acoustic instrument. We're using the price AA, the cups, the spinning cups. We're getting water quality profiles, and we're getting a couple of samples for density, shallow and deep, all just to understand what the flows are at the new breach. Next slide.
Joking that South Arm looks like Lake Tahoe water. Like, are we sure
It's
the
heavily
modification of the right water body?
Yeah, the water's very clear right now. It's heavily grazed, I think, or who knows? Yeah, but it's pretty clear. Oh yeah,
We suspect.
Well, we go to the new breach and the water looks really clear. And I think Christine, this is where you're taking over. All right, thank you. Are there any questions for me on what we just looked at? Good, okay, thanks.
I kind of just wanted to remind folks of all the water quality monitoring programs we have out there, and then we'll follow up with some salinity data. But for GSLEP, so here's kind of a map of what we have going on routinely. GSLEP sites are 4 sites in the lake. Those are collected monthly when we can access the lake. Biannual samples, partnership with DWRe and USGS, those are at 8 sites in the open water, 11 sites total. And then we have inflow and outflow sites, Bear Bay, Weber, Goggin, Farmington Bay, and then breaches in the causeway. And just to remind you of that monitoring going on, we're monitoring nutrients, density, salinity, and we'll be adding on major ions at a quarterly time step. So that kind of serves this group collecting our density and salinity data. So from that, we can go to the next slide. From those monitoring programs, you can see we have data back to 2010 roughly. I guess I've all seen this many times before. We have salinity on the y-axis over time. This is for 3510, our site in the central part of Gilbert Bay. And our solid dots are at depth, and then these kind of hollow triangles are shallow samples. So if we kind of zoom into where we are now, we kind of dipped below our 160 gram per liter ecological threshold during spring runoff, and now have gradually started increasing as lake levels are going down. The most recent values that we were able to measure, and I think this was us on the 28th, or maybe it was GSLEP on the 28th, we measured 163 grams per liter at the surface and 165 at depth. And so we can kind of see that deep brine layer at this site has disappeared. Those surface and deep samples are showing very similar water quality. It's a little bit different in Carrington Bay. We'll show that next. And there may be a very thin lens of deep brine layer at that site, but it is below where we typically sample at this site. And just to remind everyone, no one can access the lake right now. USGS as well as GSLEP were not able to get on the lake. And so we weren't able to get a sample for July. I did put on here what we've measured at Saltaire, our kind of southern South Arm gauge. We do collect salinity there. So on July 25th, the value there was 175 grams per liter. Next slide. And then here is just another plot but showing density. This allows us to put on the site at 2565. So you can see this orangey color that's representing our site in Carrington Bay. Similar kind of thing where we have solid dots at depth and then the triangles for shallow. At this 2565 site in Carrington Bay, we still have a deep brine layer there, or we did as of June 28th. So we'll see how long that lasts. We're curious to see that with the new berm modification, how long a pool of deep brine stays in that part of the lake. But yeah, again, these densities, which are kind of the most raw data we have, are showing a trending upward in density, which again, indicates an increase in salinity. So that's just kind of where we're at the moment. And we guess with low lake levels continuing that trend, we would expect these values to increase throughout the summer.
Where do you expect saturation to occur, Christine?
That would probably be a question for Andrew.
In the south.
Yeah, what specific gravity do you think is happening?
So about 1.223.
That's fairly precise. I was going to tell you 1.21. Your problem was cute.
That's roughly what it changes a little bit, but it's in that ballpark.
Depends on the temperature a little bit.
And that's all I have. Any other questions about water quality data?
All right, thank you. So, Laura, did you?
They were impressed.
Or actually, no, I'm sorry. Corresponding with Bill Johnson's trying to get it. Oh, hopefully he's got the correct link now. So anyway, what I wanted to do, obviously, we got the results that USGS has, and it sounds like nobody's getting out on boats. But wanted to just, ask if there were any key. We talked a little bit about observations you were making, and I thought that would be helpful for everybody.
So we were about 1.75, kind of described by our pump inlet over on the north end of Sainsbury Island. But our normal track is percent magnesium coming in. And 5 years ago, we were pretty solidly at 0.5%. And now we're somewhere north of 0.7, maybe 0.72, 0.73. And we think it saturates at about 0.83 magnesium. Things will saturate, and we're expecting that will happen next year. So we're starting to make plans for desalting pumps and things like that. But I think it's got interesting implications for the ecology on the lake if you saturate that south arm. So that's what we're seeing. Other observation, I've never seen so many stromatolites out of the water as I have the last few weeks. Right now, right on the edge of the lake, you just see that dark line of the stromatolites. You're going to wipe out acres and acres over the next month.
Not just the ones that are out of the water, but the ones close to the surface too.
Yeah,
because they'll start breaking up because of wave action.
So interesting thing about us, we have that for observations. Lake access, everyone already said it's not very good right now. I think I said I've put out deep brine layer. It will be interesting to see how long that lasts, but we may not be able to see it because you can't get out measurements.
Which is very unfortunate. Matt, how about the north arm?
So it's the prime attraction, but if any group wanted access to the north arm, there's a ramp on the Barron's Trench either side. But the berm probably prevents big boats. I've taken a bass boat through there before the berm.
You know, if you want to drive out to Carrington Island on the ATV, you can do it right now.
But you
So you
shouldn't.
shouldn't.
I didn't. I already had that one.
Wait, does Laura know you just said that?
I just said he shouldn't be doing that.
I didn't say I did it. I said
He did it.
Okay, let's not even insert the idea.
I built a road
Members
there.
of the public can disregard.
I built a road there in 1983. By the way.
We're down to one pump out 12, pumping into the west ponds, and that's probably gonna go in August.
How big pumps are you running? 30,000 or 20,000?
20.
We've got 50,000. We can still run one unless the wind's blowing hard from the south, and it's down to zero. We just stop.
But we can still draw from the east side of Barron's Trench, just kind of from the ambient lake. I think we're seeing K in like 0.75% at the intake, and that's high. We have a temporary canal extension request in for the north arm for our pump station 114. That's in front of the core, and then also one for pump station 23 on its board. But the one thing we're doing is we're tapping into what we call interstitial brine. So that there's we have quite an accumulation of salt in the ponds, and it's about 33% porous. So we excavate trenches, and the transmissivity is amazing. So we excavate trenches and draw from that. So you get less brine, but it's rich. That's the one thing that we're tapping into.
Not replenishing it fast either, though, at this point either. It's a reservoir that'll work down.
Yeah, we'll at some point we'll need to sort of refill that, because otherwise your brine for the season will just.
And then a similar comment, Morton is ready to put in an application to extend canals. Cargill and US Magnesium have put in canal extensions with Corps of Engineers, and they're being really slow. Just so you know. We're okay this year, but next year we'll probably be coming.
Okay, anybody else?
Just to note that the state, the Great Salt Lake Marina is currently not able to get the rescue boat out. So we're working with state parks on using that funding that Representative Hawks had appropriated to get some dredging going. And so hopefully that'll open up. We're hoping we have enough money and the ability to open that up enough to get a channel out to the main body and get, the ramp open, as well as the ability to get rescue boats out. So maybe this year we'll have access again from that marina.
Also requiring coordination with the Corps.
Yes. very extensive.
Also, and so that you guys they are gonna try to excavate from the ramp, out from the ramp?
That's the goal. We have we're trying to keep the deposition of the dredge material under an acre for permitting requirements, but so we're kind of walking the line, see what the volumes of dredge material and everything look like, but that's cool. Okay, thank you.
What depth are you intending to dig?
We'd like to dig out 6 feet.
6 feet down? Yeah. You know, there's a famous mirabolite layer down in there somewhere.
There is, that's, we've with Dave Shear to hopefully identify that and figure that out.
You know, there's probably some gaps, and maybe you can find a way through. Last time we had to dig through one, we used a hammer bit on the end of a 245 backhoe
Really?
to punch holes and use dynamite.
No kidding. Wow, that's wild.
And that, you know, so we'd have to copper off the ends that we were working on. We'd pump water out and get the 245 down there, and it was like on a bedrock floor. Punch holes, pack it with powder, and shoot it. Then you could put the shovel back on the backhoe and move them around the way out. And set it up on the side, and in the year the rain and stuff would turn it to dust.
Yeah, I've heard that, and I think that's going to be a challenge in the methodology for getting the dredge out to the main body.
I've got a dredging engineering certificate from Texas A&M. And they said the main thing you do on a bid is don't divulge anything you know about the canal. I said, I don't know what's down there. You'll have to dig it fly down. Because if you tell them anything, it'll be the basis for the lawsuit they sue you with when it doesn't work.
Pretend we didn't hear you say that.
I'm just saying you don't know anything about that.
Turn that on record. We've done this before.
Yeah, bummer. This is our first kickoff of all of our good recording.
Well, good. Phil Brown, have you, with your work out on the lake, if you have anything you can add?
Not much more to that. I mean, our harbor's shut down right now for dredging. They've got to clear out some sediment flow that comes in from the Bear River that ends up swamping our channel out there. We should have that done later in the month. Our last sampling date was on July 20th, and salinities that we measure were a pretty close match to what USGS presented. We had an average of about 17.1% on the refractometer for our lake sites in the Epilimnion. And as far as that clear water in the picture of the new berm opening, that's more or less lake wide, and that's fairly typical with the Artemia population peaking this summer and grazing the resource down. And so despite the high salinities, the Artemia population seems to be weathering it for now. And we should be able to have more information on the lake later on in the month when we're able to access it.
Great. All right, well, yeah, these are unprecedented conditions, so I think these observations and the data that we get, I think are going to be helpful. Usually we're having to extrapolate these extremes, and unfortunately we're at the extreme. So capturing that is going to be very helpful as hopefully we go back the other direction, but then this way we've got the data as we model it and look at different scenarios. So, all right, well, let's move on. I asked Laura if she could kind of give us an update on the berm construction.
Do you want to scroll down to the drawings? No. I'm pretty sure everyone has had a chance to take a look at them, but I can start the conversation there, and then I can show you some pictures of all the activities. So Eric Dixon is the engineer that was working on this project, got it contracted and finished within 1 week, and was amazing. The railroad was also an amazing help for this this project. They ended up, while they said they weren't going to help much, they ended up doing a ton of work. And so I think it was the contractor is SNL. I can't remember SNL. What, I don't know, SNL Inc. Yeah. Anyway, it may have been the easiest $500,000 they ever made. But the railroad was awesome to work with. They helped getting rock from the quarry and putting it on their train cars taking it out to the spot, dumping it, and then helping them move. You'll see how they move the rock down. But as far as the construction drawing, things went just as planned. We had a couple of weekly meetings during the prep, and Eric kept us posted of what was going on. And I think we don't have the final as-built yet for what the final images and underwater pictures look like yet, but we're hoping to get those in the next week. Eric is out of town this week, so that's why you have to listen to Ben and I talk about this. I think the only thing different than what was in the drawings was they said they ended up leaving some bigger rock north of the causeway breach, just if they needed to have those bigger rocks in case there was movement from the smaller rocks. Is that what you?
I think it was kind of it ended up flaring a little bit from going from west to east, which we thought was fine. It didn't change the height of the berm, more just the width on the west end is kind of how I understood it.
So, does anybody have any questions? Well, maybe we should take a look at the pictures and video, and then let me know if you have questions. Pictures are worth 1,000 words, right?
Yeah.
So let me see.
Well,
So stop sharing.
Pulling that up, I was just going to mention too that one thing that we did with the contractors, they were doing that as we asked them to leave the pad that they used to walk the tractor down, and it's much of that infrastructure in place. So we anticipate that if and when we have to go in and modify it again, we're hoping it'll be a fraction of the cost, because a lot of the material that they would have, the prep time that it took to get this done was done just getting down to the water, and really the work in the berm or in the channel took place over the course of like 2 days. So anyway, in the future, I think it's going to be pretty slick when they have to go in and remove or add material.
Yeah, you will see the pad that is left for them. So if Eric was here, he would narrate every picture for you and talk about each piece of equipment, but I don't have that knowledge. So I think the contractor brought out 3 pieces of equipment, and then the railroad had the rest. This is the beginning. Eric likes to take a picture of all the spiders out there. There's a couple of those.
I think this was cool too. This was a piece of railroad equipment, and I guess it's one of the few bucket loaders that dumps to the side. So that was pretty valuable in the process, because they had the rail cars coming out and side dumping the rock next to the railroad, and then these guys were able to easily move it, which really helped out the contractor to save some money on the cost of his job. Didn't save the state any, but.
This is the quarry where they started taking all the rock from. One of these is a video.
Looks like a dust problem there. We got to call DWRe.
They've had an increase in fugitive dust calls, by the way.
Lakeside?
Just in northern Utah in general. So this is a video. I don't know if it will show. It's just sorting the smaller rocks from the bigger rocks, but.
And apparently that's a pretty unique piece of equipment that this contractor had that allowed them to sort that on the end of their implement.
Oh. It's gonna be anticlimactic now.
Yeah, we should
just keep on. This was their living quarters. They stayed out there for the week that they were there, or days.
Yourself a side business.
Maybe.
Yeah.
For the next round,
I had a trailer out there for 90 days. We dredged the inlet canal to the governor's pump station.
Oh.
May until September.
So this you can start to see how they, I guess, maybe this This doesn't give you a very good perspective, but you can start to see how they created the pad that they could move these machines down to the water. Well, this video is kind of cool, actually. It's like all three of these, the machines are going at one time,
And there was
working together.
a lot of on-the-ground coordination, because originally they were going to prep the pad and walk the equipment down and place the materials that they imported in. But as they got closer, they realized that they could, take rock from the existing pad and pull that down and put it in the berm and then backfill the area and kind of build themselves back up. So it's kind of a lot of equipment moving around, but it ended up working out really well. I don't think the videos are going to work.
It's like dropping one of the big 4-foot rocks into the water.
So they went to the 4187 elevation.
It said there's 3 feet of water flowing over the top of the berm.
Say there's 3 feet right now?
That was last week when they finished. I don't know.
So they didn't quite get their full 4 feet.
More spiders.
How many boulders can spiders move?
There's enough of them out there to move.
Watercolor is striking.
It's amazing.
So they started on, what were the dates that they were doing this?
They started on the 22nd, Monday the 22nd, and finished on Thursday the 20, like later that week, the 25th, 6th.
I think it
Was it?
Friday the 22nd, is it right? Was it Monday the
Yeah.
24th?
Oh, the Monday was a holiday, and they were out there for
Yeah, I
the
think they-
pre.
I don't know if we know
construction
the
meeting.
exact
Sorry
day they
about that.
started the construction, but they staged and began work Friday and they were done by the following Thursday. So it took less than a week to do everything prep. Moving around.
Do they have to buy the rock from the railroad, or do they just get it from?
No, I think they donated it all.
Oh, these guys made a killing. Big killing.
More picture at the end. So I think, is this their equipment that is
I think they had
doing
the guy down there
the
to-
monitoring?
So what was the volume of material put into the breach?
We have those numbers yet. We'll be getting an as-built here shortly, but
More anything? More everything.
and we'll be working to develop a monitoring plan with water quality as well as the Corps. That'll have to be approved through an MOU. So we're working on that right now.
And Ryan submitted that draft monitoring plan to us. We're gonna talk about sharing it with the Corps and just making sure that we're all good with that. We'll get the agreement signed and be on with the monitoring. But you can see here, this is kind of how they left the pad down there. So they're going to place a few rocks up at the top to prevent vehicles from driving down, but they'll leave access so you can get back down there and do some work again, should we need to.
Great. Good deal. Any questions? Anybody? All right. Well, thanks, Laura. They got that done very quickly.
About $300 a cubic yard.
So nicely sorted rock they got there. Polished up, again, polished and everything. But
Yeah, I think the amount of work that went into, I mean, there's more time spent organizing this process and contracting and doing the front end stuff than there actually was on the ground moving rocks.
But quite honestly, I think what it came down to is that this is probably this contractor's, like, if I have to do a price, because I think everybody's so scheduled out, and we needed someone quickly, and I think the state was willing to fork out to get it done fast.
No, that makes sense. I think everybody's super busy and.
So we were lucky to have a contractor that even did, I think, at this point.
We only had one bid. I can't remember if we told you that yet.
So do we have a plan for what happens if the lake goes a bit lower? Do we have it, are we willing to separate the two arms of the lake?
I think that we made a resolution last time, and I think we would want to, as you know, this committee would want to monitor that and have some foresight as we start getting closer to be able to say, you know, we've gone down another 1.5 feet or at the middle point this year, maybe start thinking about, you know, if it's next year that we need to start thinking or planning to modify it, or if we think we can make it another, you know, season. But
Yeah, and I just did the rudimentary model, so if next year is like this year, where will it be? And my guess is around September 1st next year, you can be 4186.5, so you're going to be about 6 inches out of the water by September.
Wouldn't that put it 6 inches underwater at 4186?
No, if your berm height is 4187.
Oh, excuse me.
And you're going down to 4186.5, which is just saying the evaporation this year will be like the evaporation next year. It'll be 6 inches out of the water about September.
That's September 23.
Yeah.
So this year will be important to monitor snowpack and see what we forecast. And
Might as well get a bid, so it gets a little bit this time.
this time we did everything in you know, less than a month. I think if we had
That's why you want to start bidding now?
several months, we would.
And we will have funds available to make those modifications.
And I think, and Ben's right, the resolution was that we would evaluate and then go back in and modify it if the lake does look like it's gonna keep dropping. And so I think the key is gonna be watching, you know, how this winter sets up. And, you know, in the January, February, March timeframe, probably January, start really seriously considering, okay, what does it look like? And with the idea that we would want to get out there probably in March, April. Yeah.
And to me, you know, judging by the immediate effect that we had based on what Ryan showed us today, I think it's, you know, well worth it, and hopefully we can get a couple of years out of it, or hopefully the water comes up enough that, you know, we don't have to go in and modify it. But if we do, you know, the state has the funding to do that, and we also, like this year, I've made a request to have ongoing funding to, you know, to be able to react when we need to.
So I think our goal was to delay the increase in salinity in the south arm, principally to help the brine shrimpers, and probably wasn't opposed to helping the extraction people not have to desalt pumps. So what's our criteria for when we modify it the other way?
You mean like if the water were to come up,
Or
or?
I'm just saying, yeah, what are we going to do to that thing in the long term? We want to leave more water in the south, we want to dam, or we have a restricted flow to the north? I mean, do we have any idea what our goal is? Because I think right now, I don't know what the goal is beyond trying to delay saturation. But if next year's like this year, we'll be saturated anyway, and so I don't know where you have to turn or what your decision point is. So is anyone thinking towards what the basis of our
I thought the goal was to maintain the salinity between
Target range.
right and
Yeah, it is, but once we get, you know, if you have another year like this year, around September, you're gonna saturate your south arm, and then I don't know what the point is, except I guess you may break the saturation sooner on the going up end.
so just nuclear bomb it.
Well, I think
Yeah.
the point is though, is that even if we hit saturation on the south arm, having the berm in is going to make it easier to, you know, once we were able to bring water back into the south arm and have a good water year.
Exactly.
So I don't anticipate that we would take it out just because we had saturation, but if the water were to drop enough to dam the two off, is what we're trying to avoid. We agreed last time that we would want to, continue to have the.
I don't know what Joe's needs are, but if you start getting maybe a difference between the elevation in the north and the south, you may want to react to that, but I think we ought to decide what sort of thing are we going to think about to either open it up or leave it.
The resolution last time, contemplate that.
Yeah, but I think I'm just trying to think what we think about.
Right, I think the goal for putting the berm in was to reduce that north to south influx of salt. To hopefully keep us within the range that we wanted in the south arm. We've exceeded, we're above that range already, but the berm hopefully will reduce that incoming load to the south arm. And so I think and then the other component to it is that we want to make sure that we can maintain flow through the breach. To keep the two arms connected. And so I think if the lake keeps coming down, that's where the berm's gonna have to keep going down with it. And then I think if we do start to see the lake coming back up, then I think we may have to adjust the berm in the other direction, trying to keep that north to south load down while the lake is recovered.
Well, the lake's recovering now as much salt as they can get from the north to the south.
And to your point there's a target range that was identified. So if that was the case, if the lake came up enough, I think we'd be looking at the exact same or the exact opposite of what we did, where we would consider lowering the breach to restore, north to south flows.
Because, John can recall when we were working hard to get the salinity up because it was hurting fractures.
Yeah, that was a little before me, but,
I keep forgetting.
I really hope we have this problem where we can start deciding how we need to
Right.
work north.
But I think that the commitment is to adapt it, and it's an adaptive management tool. So I think we want to work towards that range in the south arm based on, really the berm is our own tool that we have.
Well, I'm just saying, since 1956, we've exported 2/3 of the salt from the south arm to the north arm.
But I think Tom's point overall is good, and that maybe we set elevation-based criteria. When lake goes below X, this is this response action.
That is what I'm saying, Joe. We ought to at least have that thought out in advance so we know.
We're doing it, for our operations, different operational regimes, like lake level regimes, because, when you're pulling in really concentrated brine, everything kind of slides along the process. So our ponds that are, where you do harvesting sort of slide up the process. Sometimes the infrastructure isn't capable of supporting haul trucks. So we're kind of developing these lake level regimes.
I think the other interesting point is, though, right now, any increase in salinity is just a straight evaporation effect. The berm won't probably do anything to prevent, the salinity from north to south right now shouldn't be affecting the south arm. It'll just all be straight evaporation. You got this many tons of minerals and this much water, and if you evaporate away 2 million acre-feet of water, which is whatever that is, and just straight evaporation salinity, that there's no control of that from, unless you can get all the farmers in Box Elder County and all the people along the Wasatch Front to ration their water.
Flush their toilet at the same time.
So just to clarify, so what I'm hearing is that when we had our criteria for the berm, we were targeting the salinity of the south arm was our criteria. But perhaps what I'm hearing is that maybe now that we've already exceeded that criteria, you're suggesting that we go to more of a water level basis for adjusting the berm.
With water level being a proxy for salinity to some degree, they're roughly seemingly correlated.
But so I guess, the only thing that seems like you're just writing off I get that we're past the salinity range, but you still have a brine shrimp population. And if you, right, and the projection is that they're going to be limited as far as production as well as survival. So, and it'll impact the phytoplankton as well. But if you're just, I don't think we should get away from just saying, well, it's too late, we can't meet this criteria and just walk away from it. I mean, if you still have a salinity where your production for brine shrimp, brine flies, and resource for the birds, that I think you want to try to maintain the connectivity there for sure. But and maybe that's what you're talking about as far as the level.
Yeah, I'm just saying, John, that when you get below, when you get saturation in the South Arm,
Right.
what other solution is there? You're just gonna sit there and watch it.
I mean, the berm for some height would reduce the potential increase in salinity to the south arm, right? Because if you didn't have the berm, then it would be worse. And I'm not on my skis. I don't know if there's kind of a ramp up in terms of salinity, impacts, or is it,
That's what we don't know.
I'm curious what the benefit to putting an elevation is, as to what we've already done, where we basically said that we want to maintain that connectivity. I mean, doesn't that get at the same thing and a little more flexibility to that as well?
But what I'm saying here, the South Arm, we're disconnected now on the north to south flow. You stop that. That means any change in salinity now will only be straight evaporation salinity. The question is, do you leave those two halves disconnected? Or do you open the breach some?
But you're anticipating, like, if the water were to drop below the top of the berm.
Yeah.
But we've already, last time we adopted that recommendation to modify the berm in the case that that we lose connectivity. And so I believe, like, that's already recommended.
the mitigation.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's the question though. What does the Corps of Engineers say about that berm? Are they concerned about it?
The Corps is looking at this as a maintenance of the adaptive feature. And I think that the way they're looking at this is that the state is going to modify it as needed. So if we were to drop below that level, we're going to take that recommendation to reduce the height of the berm.
Well, I'm gonna take my sailboat through there. They're in charge of maintaining navigability.
Where are you gonna get your sailboat in?
I've got a modular one, you just drag it across and like stick it out.
That's a good question.
Well, I think, Tom, I'm glad you're thinking about what those next steps are. We need to be thinking forward, towards how the lake, how do we adapt as this lake goes? And what I hear, I think what you're saying is that now we have, if we have very little to no north-south flow, we're still exporting salt to the north arm. So the south arm is losing salt, but its salinity is increasing because it's evaporating. Right?
Exactly. So I'm just saying.
And so when the lake comes back up, then we may, I guess the hypothesis is that the south arm may freshen up faster. Than because we've lost that salt mass in the south arm. And so then we have to consider how to adjust the berm to increase that north to south flow again, to bring that salt back in.
Well, I'm just saying, yeah, that's part of what I'm thinking. I'm just thinking the scenario. Let's say we have 5 more dry years. Or let's go Book of Exodus. Let's see what or Genesis. We got 7 more dry years or whatever. Are we okay just to be cut off? Because I think the salinity will be lower cut off than if you open the breach back up. So, and I'm trying to have any dog.
There is a natural invert bubble.
Yeah.
Where it, that's.
But the bed there is 4178. That's a lot there.
What it is.
Yeah. So you got another 10 feet to go.
I thought it was 83. Or is that a
I
build
was
up?
looking at the drawing here that they put
Yeah,
up there.
it's 78.
Natural bottom, there's 4178.
They were gonna put a pipeline from the Pacific here. Let's just make a conveyor belt and ship salt to the ocean.
So I think there's, I think you're making a good point that we need to keep an eye on salinity. We need to understand how the salt is moving back and forth. And as the lake, hopefully we have this question of the lake's coming back up. Now we've lost all the salt to the North Arm. How do we bring that salt back? And because then I think we're potentially bumping against the lower part of that range that we identified. And so I think those are things that we need to be prepared for and study. And I think, I think the studies and the monitoring and what we're going to hear about now, and just in terms of what's going on with the salt mass in the South Arm, are going to be super important for that.
Like I say, I don't look at have a dog in the fight right now. I'm just saying, what do we want to do? Let's say the brine shrimp are our only criteria, only brine shrimp. Do we leave them disconnected in the North and South Arm? Is that the best for the brine shrimp?
I feel like the salinity range that we established is best for the range.
And you don't get to choose that anymore because you disconnected. So you're going to flow from the north. You're just sitting here cooking down. So if you disconnect
Say
it,
we're below 173.
salinity,
No, the elevation. How are we disconnected from the north?
let's say if the lake goes down another 2 feet next year,
Then we
the
would
berm will be a
take the berm.
dam.
Then we'll take the berm down.
Yeah, the
Will it not help or hurt us?
Hopefully it'll help, because that's the goal, is to limit it.
I don't know how it'll help.
It'll limit the North Arm water from going into the South Arm and infusing salt into the South Arm.
If you're cut off completely, you cut it off.
But we're not gonna be cut off completely because we'll go in and scrape off the top.
So why don't we leave it cut off completely? Because it'll help you maybe have better salinity on the south arm if we leave it cut off.
Maybe, maybe not.
I think that's where the salt mass question of the South Arm comes in, is making sure that we're able to, we know what that salt mass is, and then be able to compare that to what we're modeling that's being exported.
Okay. Because we agree as a group that it's better to maintain the connectivity.
The concept, the agreement when they put that bridge in, is you'd maintain the same flow north to south that we had through the culverts when designed in 1956.
With the addition of the adaptive controller.
So that's to make sure you could control it. So you had to do more than that. But the agreement was you'd have the same flow through the bridges you had through the culverts.
Is that your
It wasn't 56 though, it was the day the culverts were closed, that flow ratio.
Okay, so still. Whatever it was, we're not doing that right now.
Right. I think it seemed like that was just there was no consensus on what's better because you don't know what you're doing at the time. I think it was just an arbitrary.
That's the way it works though.
Right.
401, 404 permit, you replace, your the law.
You're recreating the flow from A and B with C.
Yeah. But I don't think we're held to that because
Well, I
that's the
think you're
purpose of
legally.
this committee.
I think you are.
That's,
Well, no, there was an agreement that was established that said that we would create this group to help us decide what
That's what I
optimal
thought.
salinities would be.
So we're not
So
held
it's
to whatever
not-
that flow was, we're held to whatever.
but then it is choosing what are we managing for, right? What is best, and not skewing it one way or another.
I think if you go look at your permit, it says in there, you'll maintain the flow.
I agree that there's,
And this group doesn't get to change the Corps of Engineers.
does the permit say that we'll maintain the existing flow or we'll maintain flow?
The flow, what year was it, Joe? 10 years ago?
2013.
Almost 10 years. So you're not doing that right now, so this is kind of an exception. And the lake would have not maintained the flow then anyway, I don't think. But now we've further cut that off. So I'm not even arguing this is what I want one way or the other. I'm just saying that is a legal requirement, that this group doesn't get to change.
that's the case. If it's legal, then.
I don't see the South Arm extraction people suing over it right now because they don't want any more concentrated things right now.
Well, let's, I guess we can go back and look at what those original permits say. And I think the intent of this committee was, and this committee was formed as part of that permit to provide recommendations for how to manage the berm. And so, you know, we can look at the legal language there to make sure we're not crossing any boundaries.
But there was a legal handoff to some degree
Mhm.
at the end of UP's 5-year permit. So
it was upon the alteration, but we could have not touched the berm and
Yeah.
UP would have been responsible for 20 years. But the committee recommended the change and here we are.
But it doesn't change the permit conditions. You just have to manage to meet the conditions.
I think there's certain aspects though, like, I mean, there's, in the world of like permitting, there's like, you know, force majeure type circumstances where when you're looking at a persistent drought that's been ongoing, you can't maintain flows from 2010 and 2022 already. And new record lows, so I would argue that that's arbitrary requirement.
We probably have to take this offline. Bottom line is, we're doing less than what the permit says because we put additional obstacles to maintaining the permit conditions.
Well, let's do that. Let's look at what the permit says and track that process through. And I know the recommendations that were made were based on protecting the uses of the lake, based on these really low conditions that nobody foresaw. And so now, you know, we've made some adaptive management to try to protect those uses. And I think as we contemplate new and potentially even more extreme conditions in the future, I think those are things that we're going to have to consider is how are we balancing, you know, these uses. And so those are, I think, so I think it's a good question to think about. I think that's the intent of this committee too, is to think about these before they occur, so that we're not scrambling at the last minute. But I think to be able to answer some of those questions on, you know, what could happen if the lake does keep going down, I want to make sure we've got some time to hear about some of these studies. Because I think these are going to be critical to answering those questions.
And this may be Sam's territory. I'm saying, if you have a couple more years like we're at here, the top of your berm will be out of the water. Do we then open it or do we not? What's the best choice?
And I just want to say that, I mean, for better or worse, you guys are stuck with us for the foreseeable future. Like this committee, this group isn't going away. We need you guys to help us make these decisions, and we're not going to make them without input from you all. And so as things change, we'll talk to you and we'll work together to figure something out. But
Now that the permit's been bifurcated as well, you know, we hope that we'll take a more proactive approach in being able to monitor the snowpack and forecast a little bit, maybe have some insight as to how far it's going to drop this year. And, you know, in all reality, we'll know by March what the winter looked like. We'll have a good idea. We'll have a good idea by March if the winter was you know, is going to perform, if it's another 2011 year, 2017 year, whatever. But we would want to probably have the berm modified again by, you know, the end of June, right? And that's when we start seeing the drop. So if we needed to start engaging a contractor by, you know, March or April, we could do that and have a few months to get someone on board. It'd be 3 times as much time as we had this year.
What you demonstrate, taking out a chunk in the middle will be really easy compared to what you just did.
Yeah.
So I think frankly, you can wait or just get the backhoe, cut a hole through it, scrape some rocks out.
Right, but that's the intent, is to monitor it, and I think that was the right recommendation we made, is we want to maintain the connection because, what's that?
Why?
We agreed on that, Tom.
But why? Why did we need to maintain it? I agree it's a good idea, maybe.
So you can bring your sailboat through.
My kayak, maybe.
So you guys aren't complete with that. And so that there's flow between the arms. So that
There's benefits from
for it's not just, yeah, it's hard. I feel like we benefit from that too. It allows exchange.
Yep. So I guess those are, so I think we'll look at the permit again and try to reconstruct that and how that affects all this. But I think the key going forward is that Forestry, Fire and State Lands wants this committee to be able to provide our input and ask these questions so that we can be prepared for, unforeseeable conditions. If it does, we're working toward trying to be able to forecast and develop a solution that is easily adaptable for low conditions and high conditions. But while we're working towards that, we're trying to make these corrections to minimize the impacts in both arms. And so that's, I think we want to, I'm glad you brought up your concern, because that's something that we need to think about. And, if, what happens if the lake keeps going down? We thought, and I think so far it looks like the berm is doing what we intended it to do. But if the lake keeps going down, if the salt mass in the south arm is such that we're creating a different condition, like I think you're suggesting, then that's something we need to keep an eye out for and think about how we can respond to that. Whether that's if that's lowering the berm or raising the berm, I think those are the things that we need to consider. But anyway, thanks for bringing that up.
Let's move on to your.
Yeah, thanks. So, Ryan, I had you next on the agenda to talk about your new grant, improved discharge and water velocity monitoring.
Right, so I don't have any slides on that. Do you think everybody can hear me? Should I go up? Sure. So we have a new Hot Topics grant to purchase a new uplooker velocity sensor for the new breach. The existing velocity sensor measures just velocity vectors at 10 points in the water column. And the new instrument that we're purchasing, it'll measure over 200 locations in the water column. And so it's going to allow us to really zone in. If there is any north to south flow and south to north bidirectional flow, we'll be able to zone in on where that boundary is. And it's just going to be a much more rich data set for us and the modelers to interrogate, to help us understand flows of the new breach. In conjunction with that, there's additional price AA, old school meter measurements to just kind of help validate and support the electronic sensor information coming from the new breach. This is all an effort to just improve our discharge measurements at the breach. So that's the crux of the Hot Topic grant that we've got.
Great. When do you think the new uplooker will be?
So that is in with our special purchasing contracts folks right now. They're working on it right now. And I don't know, that process just kind of has to play out. I can't rush them, but soon, I mean, by the, I think by late fall, I think we'll be there, hopefully.
Great. Yeah. That's a lot more precision.
Yes. Yeah. Dramatic improvement.
Yeah. Super. Well,
yeah.
So congratulations to you too with your new grant, multi-fidelity modeling of flow and salt transport through the breach. And so if you want to share what and please speak up so there's a microphone over there.
Sure, here.
Oh,
can you guys hear me? Hello.
I'd say go ahead.
Okay. So yeah. So I have been working on modeling the flows with the for the last almost 2 years now. And this is the third year we will continue to do that. And it has been an interesting journey. And so when we set up to do these things in 2020, basically we had two major objectives. First is quantify and predict the flow through the West Track Reach, and then essentially develop a model that can be coupled with the GSLIM or other salt or water balance models. And so in that regard, in the last 2 years, I think we have been able to develop a pretty good 3D CFD model, and the proof of the pudding is in eating it, because we have not only published about it, but we have actually used it to predict what kind of berm height to be used. And I was pretty scared that maybe the model was not worth it, because I talked with my friends at University of Hull, they're experts in gravity currents, and when I told them that our model is saying that 4 feet should be enough, they were like, no, it will overturn, don't worry, it will just fly over it. I said, are you sure? I said, what? And I started thinking, what may I have got wrong, but I couldn't find anything. But anyway, so now that the USGS has kind of shown that there's almost no flow, I can take that and throw it in their face. I know some stuff too. You're not the only expert in the room. But anyway.
Are you gonna sleep better now, Sam? No, than you.
Yeah, because it's kind of, you put your academic reputation on the line,
Yeah.
right? Because we say, okay, this is the recommendation, 4 feet should be enough to stop everything. But anyway, but to reach that, it has been thanks to the funding for the last 2 years, continued funding for the last 2 years, which helped us. And I will just briefly say, tell the story. And then, of course, we have been also developing this data-driven model, so that one day, in case, so we want to use it with GSLIM, but GSLIM might work better with a rating curve, which is one of the goals for to develop a pretty complicated rating curve. It's one of the goals for this year. But in the future, if GSLIM could work with the ANN model, or maybe in the future there would be some sort of a controlled gate structure which is put in, which continuously on a monthly basis the gate goes up and down to essentially control the flow going from north to south depending on the salt balance. Maybe we could use something like that in the future. So these were the two major goals when we started. And of course, we have already seen some of this before, and of course we published about the model. And in the last year, what we did, so since 2021 to 2022, one of the major things we did was we updated the bathymetry, right? So what I have here in the left is the difference in bathymetry between the as-built and August 2021. And red means essentially there has been scouring, and blue means red means there have been deposition, blue means there has been, so red means there have been deposition, blue means there have been scouring. So we could see this is where the berm is. There was some scouring around here, and this is what I was mentioning when I came in April this year to say that actually updating the bathymetry helped and improve the predictions of the model, which I'm just highlighting it again here. And this is important because now I think we have the model and also this is again old slide, but this is kind of showing that the general discharge estimates we have without the berm kind of is similar to what USGS has been mentioning. Of course, this is not perfect and exact because for this plot, we had maintained the water surface elevation difference. What we need to do this year is essentially try to simulate it across water surface elevation differences, because with drop in water surface, with drop in lake level, we do see a drop in water surface elevation. Now, this is just rehashing what we saw so this was essentially increasing the berm by 2 feet and 4 feet, and we said that, and this is against July 2021 water surface elevation data and density data, and we said that that increasing by 4 feet will almost close it, and for sure 6 feet will completely close it. And we are kind of seeing numbers similar to this. And guess what? It's not that I coordinated with Ryan. But I just, before when I heard that we will have a meeting, I told my students that can we run it for July 2022 with different berm heights. And guess what? We are kind of getting around 400 to 500 CFS and no flow from north to south, and 400 to 500 CFS from south to north. That's kind of where we are around the same ballpark. So over the last year, these are just all the simulations we have been doing since January, just to answer the berm height question. And we have done more simulations. Let me tell you, the CFD simulations take anywhere between 4 to 7 days, depending on the condition, running on 8 to 16 CPUs. So of course, there's a limit of number of CFD runs we can do. So there is a limit to how quickly we can generate these rating curves we want to do. But we really want to push the limits. Now that we know that our modeling is doing, we have quite a bit of confidence in the model, CFD model. So what are the things, objectives for 2022-23? So essentially, we want to generate an extensive set of rating curves, not only for further drop of lake level, but for different water surface elevation difference and density difference. But we also want to generate rating curves for a 2 feet berm, a 4 feet berm, maybe a 1 feet berm, because from the discussion, what I'm understanding is this will be an adaptive management tool. If that is the case, maybe we kind of want to know what will happen if we had 2 feet and this kind of water surface elevation. Now, again, I will warn, I quickly put these 3 and say that we will do that, but the thing is, as I said, these simulations take a little bit of time. So even if we are running on, say, if on 8, we have a 16 CPU machine, if we are running 24/7 on 8 CPUs each, in a week, if we do 1 simulation, in a month, we can do 8 simulations. So in a year, we can do 96. That is fine, 96, but I don't think 96 simulations is enough to cover many different cases for as extensive as possible rating curve we need. But we will try to see how many we can do. On top of it, we will continue to work with you guys and USGS to simulate on-demand conditions to help reduce uncertainty for both the model and the measurement. This is kind of also part of the USGS's ambit. And the final one is we will continue to further develop the ANN model and couple it with a 1D physics-based model, which is currently already embedded in GSLIM. And this one, the idea is to do that to generalize the data-driven model. Now, will that work or not? That's an open science question. But we have put it, part of what we do in the next year is not only the CFD, but we want to continue to develop the coupled model, because if we find that it is working, the 1D model coupled with the data-driven model is able to do things. So because think of it in this way, and I have mentioned this before too, the CFD model is great because if we make changes in geometry, if we are to run conditions which we have not monitored before or seen before, then that the CFD model is the only way to give us, you could say, a physics-based answer of what to expect, like what we saw for the berm height increase. The data-driven model is completely based on measured data we have, for which we have some data, but oftentimes we might not, till now we didn't have any data for berm height increase, right? That's why we never able to create an ANN model for the berm height increase. The idea for this final point of a coupled physics-based 1D model with ANN is to basically bring in physics-based understanding knowledge and the data-driven strength together. Now, doing those kind of things are also a bit of science. Sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. Let's see what happens with that. That one is a little bit more open-ended, but the rest of it for sure we will deliver. So if we see the deliverables by next year, by the end of this financial year, so basically we will have an extended set of grading curves like the what we mentioned. We will continue to do some of the monitoring for temperature and specific conductance. We have been doing, we will continue to do that, and we will continue to improve our data. So,
Great.
questions? And by the way, we have been meeting, we have already met Craig, Leila, and Krishna a month ago. The plan is to continue to meet with them once a month to coordinate how we can further use the knowledge we are generating into the GSL water management and soil balance model. So that's the main long-term goal.
Great. Any questions?
Yeah, is anybody taking this flow measurement and making a prediction where the north and south arms are going? Are we going to increase the head across the bridge, or are we going to stay the same? Do we have any, has anyone done the calculation? We've got this much area here, this much area here, lower salinity here, you have this evaporation, higher salinity there, you have another one. Is anyone making
So if I
any
understand,
smarter than me kind of guesses? for where we're going?
GSL does that water management modeling, right, Jeff?
Does it? Yeah, it would account for that surface, the new surface area, evaporation, and the water volume.
So is anybody doing that?
I know Leila's been working on improving the model. Maybe she commented. Right. I know they're working on improving the model and with a special focus, just looking at the salinity component of the model. Oh, Craig, go ahead.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so yeah, Leila is running simulations for Laura. She's trying to determine how much water would be needed to raise the lake a foot, how much water would be needed to, how much, if you cut back agricultural depletions by a certain amount, how much would that raise the lake? So we're working on modeling. There's some things we need to improve in the model, but we're using it as best we can right now. What did you have in mind?
I'm just saying, is the flow here, Craig, going to have any material? Is this berm going to change the lake elevations?
Well, of course, it's going to change the lake elevations if you don't have any water going from the north. It may affect things slightly, but as long as you keep the water going from the south to the north, I think the effect will be small. But you know, we haven't put this new berm elevation in the model yet.
So I think what you are concerned is that so at this point of time, we will have continued flow from south to north, but there is no flow coming from north to south, right? So that might hasten the drop of the water surface or the lake elevation of the south side, right?
That's part of it. I think Ryan showed us the flow from the south to the north has been diminished by half, more than half.
I don't remember the value, but
Something
so
like
if I from the model, it basically goes down. Yeah, so if it's around 1,000 CFS, it would go down to around 750, 700.
I thought I saw it was kind of almost right in half.
Yeah, around half.
I would say 5,500 or 1,200 or something like that. Just wondering what that would do to the north arm elevation versus south arm. Will I hold the south up a little longer, or can we say?
Yeah, I can't say right now. And also, just on the specifics of the discharge measurements, we would need to go and look and see what the head difference or the elevation difference was between the when each measurement was made, et cetera. You know,
I just recall when the proposal was out, like in April, there was an update to the lake elevation, like 4191.5, and at that, without the berm, it was in the 700s, I seem to recall. So it's reduced to 500, 519.
Here's the model I'm looking at. Let's say it's a dam. If it's a 2-foot high dam, then the north arm will be 2 foot lower than the south arms because you got a dam across there. They'll artificially bring the south side up and the north end will normally go lower. And of course, this isn't the dam exactly, but you reduce the window. And I would expect that dam will be something like that, where you'll have maybe a foot, maybe you'll get a foot ahead difference between north and south.
But I seem to recall the modeling saying there was kind of a de minimis effect on south and north flow.
Right, so,
Some run.
So what will happen is, and now of course, if nothing changes, hydrologically what will happen is, what we are doing is we have kind of stopped the flow from the north to south, right? And the continued flow from south to north. When that is happening, that means with time, if there is no further input of water into the south arm will continue to go down and the north arm will continue to continue to go up. Right? Because what is the elevation of the south
Will
is,
they both be just going down?
well, of course, if there is evaporation, that's another factor. But in general, always the south side water elevation has been historically always higher than the north side water surface elevation, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, because it has almost always had an inflow.
Yeah.
So what's driving the flow to the north is the head difference.
Head difference, yeah.
So if we lose that inflow, if there is no inflow to the south arm, now really what's going to drive that is you've got evaporative loss from both sides. So which side wins, I guess, is a question that the model might be able to tell us. Who's losing more water faster? And then
head difference in 86. 3.6 feet.
and it was
3 feet in 2015.
It was 3, but yeah, when the culverts were closed too.
Okay, so those culverts were open in those days. When we opened the breach on the west side in 1985, it came down by a foot. Not 3 feet, a foot.
Well, I think, like Craig said, I think the plan is to use the GSL model to be able to look at
And someone else doesn't tell us what, they began to come report.
evaluate what happens. And I mean, but that said, is knowing that the model, we don't have data to calibrate it. So we're collecting data and that goes into the model to calibrate it. So, but again, those are the questions that as we observe it, we're learning as we go and trying to think, well, what if, what happens? Try to keep on top of that. I want to make sure Christine has a chance to get her results from her study too here, looking at the south arm and the stuff, or looking at the salinity in the south arm. And you did have slides, right?
Yeah, they were in that same, yep, just started right there. Okay, so these are still preliminary results and you've seen a lot of this already, but I'll go through kind of some more formal analyses of what we've done. So this was a study funded by Forestry Burns and Land's Hot Topics grant last year, and it was basically to try and characterize salt mass in the south arm from 2011 to 2021. And so, you know, after Phil Brown kind of showed his calculations of how salt mass is changing, we kind of verified it. It tied in really well to what this Hot Topics grant that was funded. And we realized that there's just so much expertise in this group that we could really draw on to make this work, you know, to make the analysis better, as well as to make some cases and to incorporate in the discussion points that might be relevant for management. That's really a goal of this work, is to make it useful. And so we're really grateful for the input from Andrew Rubke, Elliot, Craig Manila, and Phil Brown. We've kind of been meeting with them, kind of trying to get their ideas for how can we interpret this, what are we missing, and really trying to craft it in a way we think will be useful to this group. So go next one. The key objectives that were outlined in the proposal of this work were, first of all, to develop a database of USGS salinity, density, and field profile data. We have historic data that it's not on our public database, and so we're kind of collating that. And there's just some of our data, like water quality profiles, that just don't fit into the public database. So we're organizing that, and that will be made available to the public via USGS data release. You can click. And then the objectives of the analyses are to calculate salt masses in the south arm, both in the upper brine and deep brine. We want to understand salt mass fluctuations over time, which you've all seen some of that, and then estimate the salt mass exchange across the causeway, and also try to bring in our best estimate of loading from rivers and see what kind of magnitude that is compared to the salt mass exchange at the causeway. We're also in this going to wrap in the update of the equation of state. So that was a project funded by the Advisory Council, but it fits nicely into what we're trying to do. And so that'll be another component of this final publication. Okay. We kind of built on what we had showed you previously in a big way by bringing in a bunch of different data sets. So the final work will have a computed salt mass in the south arm for 5 different data sets shown in this map. So we have our GSLEP site. This is kind of the best one, I think, that we have. And this one's at 4 sites. And the reason I think it's the best is because the data are collected monthly. So that time step is really a benefit to us. We also have a number of, I'm showing the equation of state sites where we collected samples all over the lake to verify the existing equation of state. Biannual sites, these are, this is in cooperation with the Division of Water Quality, but the USGS goes out 2 times per year at 8 sites on the lake to monitor nutrients and salinity, which we're using here. We're also using salinity data at some of our inflow sites, particularly at Lakeside and at the new breach for the south to north direction, and then also at Saltaire. And the goal, or the reason we're using all of these data sets is really to try and understand the variability and the sort of, well, to verify results in a number of different ways, but also to ask the question of, what's our monitoring strategy like? Can we identify one that's better or worse? And from a utility perspective, like, what if we don't have data from GSLEP? Can we substitute data from Saltaire, or can we substitute data for south to north? Basically identifying places where we have redundancy in our monitoring network. So that was another part of why we used all these. Next slide. So those are the data that really feed what we're doing. And I'll quickly just share an equation of state update with you. So what we've done is we have our Great Salt Lake equation of state salinity. This is computed based on measured densities. And this is for the last round of samples collected in May and June. And then we have a measured salinity. These values are measured by the University of Miami using their instrumentation. And what we found is that there's basically, they're plotting on a 1-to-1 line. This indicates to us that the equation of state that was generated by Dave Nass is still valid. With a whole new set of data we've collected this year, it's being verified. We're predicting what is being measured by the instrumentation at the University of Miami.
I'll just clarify, some of the samples were actually collected last year for this, and it's the lab at University of Miami is in the pandemic. There was just delays getting this information to us.
Yep.
But we recently got a data dump from the University of Miami.
Yep. But we're really encouraged by this. I was basically planning to redo all my salt mass calculations with an updated equation of state. But what this shows is that the one we have is quite good. It's very good. We don't need to update it, and we've just validated it with this analysis. So.
And this contains measurements from the north, right? Both north
Yes,
and south.
yeah, good point, Tom. So we collected samples on the north side of the causeway at the culverts, and then also for north to south flow. I believe those are the only ones we did, but that brings up a good point, Sam, so before we kind of only had confidence in the equation of state up to about this kind of density. And these points passed on this line here are really extending the range that we believe the equation of state can be applied, which is really exciting for us because now we can compute a salinity for north arm and we can compute it for north to south flow, which we have been really cautious to do. But this data gives us confidence we can do that. And makes it kind of fit into the framework of what I think, how we all think about it. Salinity in a grams per liter context, not just density in a gram per cubic centimeter. So it makes it a little more usable, I think.
Does this also connect with specific conductance? Or this is only TDS to salinity or TDS to density?
It's only salinity to density.
Okay.
And we find that the relationship between density and TDS versus specific connectivity in the north arm is pretty messy.
Yeah.
And also in the south, but more so in the north. Okay. Yeah. Okay, next slide. Okay, so I'll kind of just start by going through some of our findings from using all of these different data sets. So here I'm showing all of these. So I kind of considered the GSLEP data set as kind of a gold standard. And then I compared all of the other salt masses using the other data sets to that. And that's what this y-axis is showing, is the percent difference in salt mass for all these different data sets relative to the GSLEP. And this is just kind of showing it over time. These different colors indicate the different data sets. So the red is our DWQ biannual. That one was collected at 8 sites around the lake. Lakeside, at the Lakeside Breach, you can see those ones in orange. New Breach, south to north flow is in green, and then just using just data at Saltaire, so at the south end of the lake. And what we find, I'm sorry, there's a lot of animations, but what we find is that we're pretty encouraged, because most of the time, no matter how we calculate salt mass with these different data, they're generally within 10% of each other. So that gives us a lot of confidence. Another thing is that the 4-site GSLEP monitoring network compares really well with our biannual network, which is 8 sites. And so that gives us confidence that this 4-site network is it's covering a comparable spatial variability as these 8 sites. So it's covering a lot of spatial conditions in the lake, which is giving us confidence in the data set. And then we also see that, for example, if we were to look at the data at Saltaire, we generally, if we were to apply a 95% confidence interval using the variability of these values, most of the time, 95% of the time, we would be confident that a salt mass calculated using the Saltaire data would generate a salt mass within 5% of the GSLEP data. So during conditions where we are now, where folks can't access the lake, it's reasonable to say, if we want a ballpark number, let's try to use the value at Saltaire. And what we can show with these, this analysis is that we have confidence in doing that. And then finally, I think there's, I said that. Okay. Yep. Oh, no, you're good.
You wanted to go?
Okay, you're good. So if we've computed salt mass for this is on the y-axis, salt mass in millions of tons over time from 2011 to present. The black line shows the total mass in the south arm. Blue is in the upper brine, kind of where brine shrimp live. And then we have our deep brine layers in Carrington Bay, shown in red, and Gilbert Bay in orange. So you can kind of see the distribution of how the salt mass is distributed in the south arm through time. And then this gray line shows us what's the fraction of salt mass held at depth in the deep brine layer. And that's shown on this axis over here. So that ranges anywhere from about 0 to 20%. That's when it's most high. It gives you a sense of what's the magnitude of salt mass held at depth. And then there's a few more things. Another thing we found, which is probably not surprising, is that the salt mass in the Carrington Bay deep brine layer is consistently higher than for the Gilbert Bay deep brine layer. And I mean, from our understanding of the system, it's just a demonstration to us that salt mass is transferring to the upper brine layer as you move further south. It's just mixing out as it goes into Gilbert Bay. And then I think there's one more. And then most recently, I think what's striking here, it's a couple of things that are obvious, but maybe useful to point out. During the period of culvert closure, where there was no connectivity between the north and the south, we didn't observe any deep brine layer. For all other months or years and during this period of record when we had connectivity, we consistently saw a deep brine. Except for most recently, when we see a drop off of mass in the deep brine layer. And we also see a drop off of mass in the Gilbert Bay deep brine layer, consistent with observations that the deep brine in Gilbert Bay is decreasing. And this may be a function of low lake levels, as things are able to mix out more easily, get that physical mixing kind of penetrating at the water column more easily. Or it could be a function of also decreased north to south flow with lower lake levels as well. But just kind of a unique observation, a unique condition we're observing most recently, likely related to our low lake levels.
But that section right there around 2016, that's just obviously the closed breach.
Yep.
So doesn't that even weigh out more heavily that there's no flow of north to south? Deep brine just washes out over time.
I think so. Yeah, and that we just don't see it. I've wondered I've wondered that.
So we should have it go away again, I would predict, right?
I think so. Yeah, with low lake levels potentially. And this is another thing. Sorry, tangent perhaps, but we've been wondering about the permeability of the causeway and its ability to convey north to south water to the south. And you might look at this and say, well, it's very low because there was no deep brine when the culvert was closed. There was no opening. But I do wonder if there still could be seepage through the causeway during this time, but there's so much wave action against the causeway that could just be mixing out and not able to form in the deep brine there. Just something to keep in mind. Anyway. Okay, and then if we just kind of look at the big picture, this is the total South Arm salt mass, again, over the same time period, but with a little more context, where we're seeing these kind of long-term trends. We do see seasonal ups and downs. They're on the order of like 50 million tons of salt fluctuations with lake levels. And then we see these longer-term trajectories where, you know, when the culverts were closed, kind of 2014 to 2016, we saw kind of a decrease of 75 million tons. Obviously, when the new breach opened, large decrease, 160 million tons. And then as Phil Brown has documented and kind of turned us all onto, this gradual increase since the time of the breach opening to the present. So we're estimating that we've recovered about 62% of the mass that we lost during the breach opening. Okay, is there something else here? Okay. And to try and explain that increase most recently, we turned to what's happening at the causeway. So there's a lot happening in this plot, sorry. But here's the daily salt flux in millions of tons per day from the time of breach opening till now. And we've quantified south to north flux using a number of different data sets as well. So this line kind of shows you the general pattern, and all these different symbols just indicate that it's sort of been verified by all these independent data sets. We're using USGS Salinity, USGS ROE, HDR Salinity. That's kind of what all these different dots represent. And then for north to south, we have done a similar thing. Those are shown in red here, using USGS residue on evaporation, TDS measurements, as well as HDR data. These periods with kind of a gray hatch indicate when the flux from north to south is greater than south to north. And I think what's interesting here is the seasonality of these things. So during spring runoff, so March to June, when the South Arm lake elevations go up, you see that's when you get these big pulses in south to north flux. So large exports of salt to the North Arm. And then when you tend to see this lake level in the South Arm decreasing during these decreasing rates of change, that's when you tend to see this period of import. So it's kind of this sloshing. You kind of hit it at the right time, where Lake South Arm's going down just as North Arm's coming up. And I think that's when you get these pulses of salt mass into the South Arm. And then we've also incorporated the flux at lakeside, so the far west breach along the causeway. There is water salt mass being exported there as well. And then the context of river inflows, we calculated a daily flux for those. That's including flux from Weber River, Farmington Bay, and Goggin Drain. And just to illustrate that the amount of salt coming in from all those sources is just very, very small compared to what's happening at the breach. And I think that's pretty much it. Yeah. And with all those are the main analyses, still working through, kind of the key findings. But this is where we've kind of recruited UGS, Division of Water Resources, as well as Phil Brown, to say, okay, here's what we're finding. Can you really rigorously check the methods and the analyses we've done? Because we really value their expertise and want to make this as good as we can be. But then let's also think about where this salt is coming from. Why is this salt accumulation happening most recently? And so we've been having discussions about that. We're really curious about what's been happening in the North Arm. This paper from 2012 by folks at Utah State have kind of showed, historically from the 1960s kind of to the early 2000s, how the North Arm salt load, that's kind of shown in these blue colors, contrasts with South Arm salt load. And as you can see, there's the relation is inverse. So when salt mass in the north arm goes up, the salt mass in the south arm goes down. And we'd be really curious to extend that out during our period of study, because that might give us some clues about what's causing this fluctuation in the south arm. Is it mirrored in the north arm? And that might suggest that we're just missing something at the causeway. We're not estimating the permeability through the causeway, or we're missing something at the breaches. But we're curious about trying to figure that out. And then kind of digging into all the different data sets we've used and kind of coming up with some key take homes for what does this say about our monitoring networks? Can we make recommendations to resource managers about how to make that more efficient or how to improve that? But it's really, this is kind of just how do we make it useful? So if you have any ideas also, we'd be willing to consider those. But that's kind of where we've headed with this study. So, any questions?
Any questions?
There is that missing salt, right? How many tons of missing salt?
Well, I didn't want to share that today, but there's about 100 million ton increase in south arm salt mass. So there's that amount, but then there's also the net flux through the breach, where we're estimating way more is being exported out of the south arm than entering the north arm. In previous computations of that, it's like a 200 to 300 million ton missing piece too. So not only are we seeing an increase, but we're predicting that more should be leaving. So it's on the order of 300 to 400 million tons of missing.
Wow. Provisional number. Right.
Yeah, definitely. Don't.
For the 10 years? Or
For
annual?
for 5, for since the breach opened.
Okay.
But please don't quote. We're still working on it.
Greg, you have your hand up?
Yes, you wanted me to mention something about David Tarbotton's conversation about Aggie Air and how it might be able to help. So he could run the Aggie Air around the lake causeway and other areas and tell us if he can see any temperature anomalies that might tell us about flows. So that's one thing that, and he also has an autonomous vehicle that can do samples. I'm not sure how that would help, but so that's one of the things that might help us. And I'm done with my comment. So there you go.
Thanks. Any other questions?
You might have said this the other day, but you're saying the equation of state works for the north arm.
That's what we're finding.
Up to 1.21 something. I don't remember the other remaining digits on that, those density values.
So we need another 0.01 or 2.
All right.
All right. Go.
Great, thank you very much. I think it's encouraging to see the monitoring across the lake, and even just looking at the salt air data as representative of how representative it is. Thank you very much. So we're bumping up here. It is 3:30. I guess last question for you all is anything that you'd like to talk about at our next meeting? I had pegged September 1st as yeah, I guess that's 3 or 4 weeks.
Very
away.
soon.
It does. Very soon. But I guess wanted to anything or any questions that you want to talk through, that you think we should touch on next time. I think Elliot, you had a topics grant from last year too. Elliot, are you still on?
Yeah, I'm still here. Yeah, we wrapped that up. Andrew can speak for that too. It's in a internal publication through UGS.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. And I know, I think the questions that Tom was bringing up today, I went back earlier this week. If you remember, I think 2 years ago when we were really getting this going, we kind of brainstormed what questions do we have about salinity. And I went back through that big long list that we had. We've taken that big long list and identified, how can we consolidate those into different studies? And so I started trying to, I guess, color code those to say, okay, here's where I think, we haven't even touched this one, or we can check the box and say we're done. But, so that's something that I think would be great, I think 2 years later to get your input on. I think especially now with these low lake conditions, any new questions that we need to add to the list, so that we can see if and how we can work those into new studies. But I guess keep your eye out for that. I hope to get that back out to you guys in the next couple weeks so if you can look at that and just see, do you agree that this question is resolved or not, or is it ongoing? And then if you have any new ones, because I think as we're getting into this new paradigm, our paradigm keeps expanding. This new paradigm keeps expanding. What questions should we be looking at, and making sure that we're anticipating potential conditions, next year or years after.
Yeah, I'm a slow thinker, but just thinking about what Tom was saying earlier, I think the point is good, because I think the competition between interests becomes more acute as the lake gets lower. And so we probably need to plan.
Okay. Well, we need to, we need to understand how these salinity levels affect evaporation and how that then affects the water levels on both sides. How does that affect the flow through the breach? There's all these different variables that interact. And in the end, we're trying to protect the beneficial uses of the lake. And I think, right now the ecology is probably the most sensitive to the salinities. But as we go into this new world, as that kind of present, how might that affect the salinities? What does that do to all of that? So, those are things that we'll need to think about. All right, well, do you want to meet in, say, 2 months or
October?
That sounds
First
about
week of
right.
October works for me.
Yeah.
Okay. I'll send it. Do you want to look at your calendar?
Yeah.
Jeff, I gotta roll.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll be good.
All right. Thanks, Joe.
Bye, Ray.
I got to jump off, but thank you, Laura and Eric, for putting all this work together for the berm. And thanks, Jeff.
Yeah, thank you.
See ya.
October 6th. It's a Thursday.
That works.
1 o'clock.
So what about the 5th?
Are you gone that week?
That week is kind of, but I mean, if it works for everybody else.
What about the 12th?
Does the 12th work?
I don't know. I'm a little question. I'm not sure.
Okay.
I figure out when I'm going to Florida somewhere. I might be back.
Yeah, forgot that.
That's not all bad for any of us here.
Well, I guess let's pencil in the 12th at 1 p.m. That works for everybody else. And then, Tom, if you can let me know.
Hey, Jeff.
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt real quick. That is there's a GSA, Geological Society of America meeting that week that lets out on the 12th. I don't know how many people are in attendance, but that's just one general thing to think about for the 12th.
Okay.
Wasn't the Great Salt Lake Summit like?
Oh, it's the 13th.
I'm getting back in town on the 12th.
Okay.
Oh, never mind, that's September.
So
Yeah, the summit's on the 13th.
was anybody at the GSA conference?
Yeah, I am getting back on the 12th.
Just in time.
of October.
Okay. So it's 12th in the afternoon.
I'm not sure if I'm gonna go back in. Excited. All right, back here.
You just still have those.
Yes. Great. Well, thank you, everybody.
Question here, Jeff. We've got all these nice presentations. If this is a public meeting, are these gonna be available to the public? Can you post those some ways? I think we should examine that.
Would you be okay if just did it?
That are disclaimer.
Yes, that's in there, yeah. So, yeah, it's you can send me your slides, mine. I'll make those available. Well, thank you, everybody. Online, we're adjourned.
Thanks, Jeff.
Thank you.